Hello, U.S. history students. This is a second video for Chapter 4, Section 1. We are going to talk about the foreign policy of Nixon, but again, this is outside of Vietnam, right, which we spent a few weeks looking at. And so, what do we know about Nixon and foreign policy? We know that Nixon actually enjoyed foreign policy more than he enjoyed domestic policy, okay? We also know that Nixon made his name in the 1950s as being part of the House Un-American Activities Committee and known as a very strong and fervent anti-communist during the Red Scare. Okay, so you may find it interesting when we go over this information. Okay, so Nixon heavily relied on a man named Henry Kissinger, right, who had 3 degrees from Harvard. University, right? So he was his personal advisor and then the Secretary of State. And Nixon and Kissinger both believed in realpolitik, which was it's a German word, and it simply means foreign policy should be based simply on power. So foreign policy should be based on, does it matter or not? What is a big deal, right? If you have a country such as Grenada in 1982, which has the same amount of people as Culver City or so, Ronald Reagan sent in troops there to stop the spread of communism. Well, Nixon would just say, forget it, because it's irrelevant if a country that size, without maybe a major product or resource, right, that it doesn't matter. So he says, I'm only going to deal basically with the big boys, the big guys, the ones that make a difference. Okay, so this is definitely a departure from brinkmanship, right? Brinkmanship means that you're going to go to the edge of war. That every time you see someone is possibly going to be communist, you just threaten them, say, "We're gonna nuke you. We're gonna fight you to the end. We'll destroy the world to stop the spread of communism." Right? Containment, right? The idea of stopping the spread of communism. Well, Nixon said, if communism spreads to a small country that really doesn't have any geopolitical significance, leave it alone. I don't care. I have to spend my time and resources on places such as, obviously, the Soviet Union and China. Okay. Nixon, even though he was obviously anti-communist to the core, during his last few years as president, they went through a period of détente, which means a friendlier relationship. It's a policy aimed at easing Cold War tensions. So Nixon is going to get out of Vietnam. Nixon is going to visit the Soviet Union. Nixon is going to visit China as well and develop relationships with them. So actually, in the mid to late 70s, the relationship between the Soviet Union and the United States calms down a little bit. And it'll be ramped up again in 1979. Okay? Nixon visits China in 1972. So some people are going crazy. This is negative. Why are you visiting China? It's a communist country and so on, right? The U.S. didn't even recognize China for decades as a communist country, okay? The positive is that Nixon wants to drive a wedge between China and the Soviet Union. If you have China and the Soviet Union working together, that is definitely bad news for the United States. Why? China, the largest country in terms of population. Soviet Union, the largest country in terms of land mass, okay? And if you allow these two countries to come together, to work on technology together, to share resources together, that could be quite bad for the United States, okay? So Nixon was the first president, right, to visit China and to open diplomatic and an economic relationship with them. The China in the 70s is not the China that we know now today. It was not the manufacturing capital of the world by far. It did not open up until years after Nixon was there. Okay? So he was able to get an agreement that neither nation would seek control of the Pacific region, basically Asia, right? That no one was going to do what Japan did before and during World War II, basically take over the Philippines, take over Indonesia, Malaysia, and so on. Nixon said, I'm not going to try and take those over. What about you? And China said, okay, we won't take them over either, okay? That they would continue to have negotiations, and Nixon knew this would really tick off the Soviet Union. Nixon, on the same trip, visits the Soviet Union and is the first president to visit the Soviet capital in 1972. Okay, and what happens is that it leads to a monumental agreement. So here you have Nixon shaking hands, okay, the Soviet premier Leonid Brezhnev. Okay, and Brezhnev is very Stalin-like. Okay, the man in between them, Khrushchev, was much more open. But here you have Brezhnev that says, I'm going to bring back all the harshness, the brutality, the wanton cruelty, okay, of Stalin. And Nixon was able to make an agreement with him, strategic arms limitation talks or treaty, okay, and there was a SALT II, okay, but that was never fully implemented. Okay, so basically, we have a major agreement that's going to limit ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles. Okay, now